What's good, Ghostbusters? It's me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show, y'all. This is going to be a very spirited breakdown of Ghostbusters 2, the very much anticipated sequel to the beloved Ghostbusters film. So let's just go ahead and jump into it. 5 years after the first film, director Ivan Reitman would return to direct a sequel to his smash hit. And the reason for this 5-year gap between Ghostbusters 1 and this movie was largely due to Bill Murray taking a break from acting and his anger over derogatory comments made about him by Columbia Pictures head David Putnam. But after Putnam was fired in 1987, his successor, Don Steele, got the gears going for a Ghostbusters sequel. And even though Don Steele did manage to get pretty much all the main cast together again for Ghostbusters 2, the production kind of did so in a very sneaky way. Because according to Bill Murray, the script that the Ghostbusters actors were given before they signed on was completely different from the script that they ended up getting when they showed up on set. And apparently, Bill Murray and the rest of the Ghostbusters very much preferred and were jazzed about that very early version of the script, only to be severely disappointed when they read the actual thing. Bill Murray felt like this new script prioritized special effects and slime and whatnot over actual characters. And because of that, he and a number of the other cast members didn't exactly care for this movie that they were filming at the time, and were ultimately super let down when they saw the final product. Louis Tully actor Rick Moranis actually straight up rejected cameos in the next two Ghostbusters movies to come out decades after this one, namely the all-female Ghostbusters movie from 2016, as well as Jason Reitman's Ghostbusters Afterlife film from 2021. He was a bit nervous about the idea of coming out of retirement to do another sequel after Ghostbusters 2 let him down so damn hard. In fact, he was so let down by Ghostbusters 2 that he never actually attempted to keep his movie wardrobe for himself after filming, which is something that he would usually try to do after filming movies that he loved being a part of. But anyways, Ghostbusters 2 Secret of the Ooze starts with the words 5 years later, letting us know that it's been 5 years since the Ghostbusters saved the world from a giant marshmallow man being controlled by evil David Bowie impersonator Gozer. And even though that event was witnessed by countless New Yorkers, there are still a great many people in the city that believe that the Ghostbusters are filled with nothing but hot air and lies.
Bullshit.
And that the entire ghostly affair didn't actually happen. Not only that, but the Ghostbusters were then subsequently sued to high heaven for the damages sustained from their first adventure. So much so that they were all forced to find some other sources of income to sustain themselves. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because after this 5 years later card, we are brought to the streets of New York City, where we can see some strange purple ooze leaking from underground, foreshadowing the movie's main emotionally charged threat. And while this slime appears purple in the movie, the decision to make it purple was a bit of a tough one for the production, mostly because they were debating using other colors like blue or even green, with green being a close contender because of the first film and the beloved green Slimer character. The production actually mixed up some mineral oil, methocell, and mica dust in order to bring about 13,000 gallons of this goopy ghost goo, which is wild. But not wilder than the crazy deals that we have for nerd-inspired merch over at the Heavy Spoilers store. We've got all sorts of gear inspired by the franchises that you love. If you're a fan of the X-Men and the upcoming Avengers Doomsday, then you have gotta peep this new Cyclops-inspired full power shirt that looks ultra badass. Or maybe even our new Emperor shirt inspired by the God of Doom himself. We've got all that and more over at the Heavy Spoilers merch store, so stop by and look fly today. But anyways, completely ignoring this nasty-ass goo on the street is Miss Dana Barrett, played once again by the beautiful Sigourney Weaver. And we learned that over the past 5 years, Dana has become a single mother, as we see her pushing a baby carriage while carrying a load of groceries from a nearby D'Agostino supermarket, which we can see on the side of the DAG paper bags. Oscar's father is never outright named throughout the course of the film, but director Ivan Reitman has hinted in the past that Oscar's father could be a minor character that appeared in the previous film, specifically Dana's violinist colleague that Peter Venkman rudely referred to as the Stiff.
Who's the Stiff?
The Stiff happens to be one of the finest musicians in the world.
That violinist is never actually given a name in the movie, but the Ghostbusters 1 novelization ends up calling him Andre Wallance. which might imply that Oscar's last name is Wallens as well. As Dana walks little 8-month-old Oscar down East 77th Street, you can see a man heating up over a parking ticket before we see Dana's superintendent Frank yelling at someone to fix the plumbing at Dana's apartment at 325 East 77th Street, brilliantly showing why the mood slime below New York City has been starting to act up as of late. However, because Oscar's stroller touched that mood slime, little baby Oscar would mysteriously start to bob and weave through dangerous New York City traffic, eventually crossing 1st Avenue and East 77th Street, where it suddenly stops in order to avoid a collision with a public bus. A bus that has an advertisement for New York City's famous Hot 97 FM radio station. And after Dana finally manages to catch up with little Oscar still intact, we start to hear Ray Parker Jr.'s famous Ghostbusters theme in the background before the Ghostbusters mascot Moogly appears throwing up the deuces for the Ghostbusters 2 title card, a new logo that the Ghostbusters would end up using when they open back up for business later on in the film. And I love this change to the logo because not only does this logo represent the fact that this is the second film, but Moogly the Ghost holding up a peace sign with his fingers also reflects the film's overall theme of emotional peace over emotional chaos. Very smart stuff there. But yeah, after this, we immediately see the Ghostbusters' iconic 1959 Cadillac Miller Meteor Sentinel, known as Ecto-1, driving through the streets of New York. And as the car rounds a corner past a garbage truck, you can actually just barely see director Ivan Reitman in the driver's seat, which is kind of fun. Ray Stantz and Winston Zeddemore, played by Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson respectively, finally arrive at a house for their hardest job of all, entertaining ungrateful children who wish that they were He-Man from the He-Man Masters of the Universe cartoon instead. But to be fair, most of these children booing and disrespecting two of our great nation's veterans probably weren't alive when they saved the world 5 years ago. And one of the boys at the party tells Ray to his face that his dad thinks the Ghostbusters are full of crap, which is kind of ironic considering that this boy's father is none other than the Ghostbusters director Ivan Reitman. This young Jason Reitman would go on to write and direct a Ghostbusters movie of his own in the form of 2021's Ghostbusters Afterlife, before writing and producing the movie sequel Ghostbusters Frozen Empire for 2024. And even though this birthday party looks like it was shot inside of a regular house in New York, it was actually filmed inside of Ghostbusters HQ. Well, Firehouse number 20 in Los Angeles, California to be exact. They used that fire station to shoot all the interior shots of Ghostbusters HQ and decided to just head to the 3rd floor that they weren't using in order to convert it into a home birthday party. After this, the movie brings us to Dana Barrett as she heads to the Institute of Advanced Theoretical Research, which is actually just Columbia University's Avery Hall. And running experiments at that institute is Dr. Egon Spengler, played once again by the great Harold Ramis, who co-wrote this film with Dan Aykroyd, just like he did with the first film. And honestly, if it wasn't for Harold, both Ghostbusters movies would likely be way too far out there for the average moviegoer, mostly because Dan Aykroyd's first drafts were usually way too complex and technical to be accessible. And the device that Egon is holding to record the emotions of his hot and irritated subjects is actually a monitor for radiation detector, which is basically a handheld analog Geiger counter used to detect and measure levels of alpha, beta, gamma, and X-ray ionizing radiation for personal protection, surveying the environment, and checking sources like industrial gauges or shielding. And after scanning the negative emotions of the adult couple, Egon shifts on over to a different room where a happy little girl can be seen playing with stuffed animals and a puppy. This little girl is actually Catherine Reitman, the daughter of director Ivan Reitman, in another small family cameo. And after observing the little girl for a bit, Dana asks if he and Ray could take a look into her paranormal problem, but to please leave her ex Peter Venkman out of it, even though she still secretly has feelings for him. However, Egon is able to detect these feelings when he purposely scans Dana to read her emotions, specifically after he tells her that Peter doesn't talk about her.
Does he ever mention me?
No.
After this, the movie then transitions to the set of The World of the Psychic with Peter Venkman, Peter's new hosting job after the Ghostbusters went under. He interviews a man named Milton Englund, played by actor Kevin Dunn, who would go on to play Ron Witwicky in Michael Bay's original Transformers trilogy. We actually broke the very first Transformers movie down a little while ago on the channel if you guys want to take a look-see. No pressure, I'm just saying. In Milton's new book, The End of the World, Milton uses his own psychic connection to forecast that the world is supposed to end at midnight on New Year's Eve. a prediction that Venkman hilariously challenges on his show. However, even though that prediction sounds far-fetched as hell, that crazy bastard would almost actually be proven right by the end of the movie, as the villainous Vigo would almost be brought back to life at midnight on New Year's Eve, were it not for the positive emotions of happy New Yorkers celebrating. Then Peter shifts focus to his other guest named Elaine. No, not Seinfeld Elaine, more like out of her mind Feld Elaine.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Because an alien supposedly told her that the world is going to end on Valentine's Day 2016, a date that would go on to become a running gag for hardcore Ghostbusters fans. So much so that the days before the actual date in 2016, Elaine actress Chloe Webb would make a fun little video as her character to offer an update on her prediction.
Hi, I'm Elaine from Paramus, New Jersey, round the bend from the Holiday Inn where I had my alien abduction. So that alien texted me out of the blue to say that the world was not ending on Valentine's Day 2016. That prediction was based on the fact that the slime was rising at such a rate, which it is, but he said as long as there's more love than slime, the world goes on. So that's good, right? Anyway, happy Valentine's Day. Bye.
Actress Chloe Webb actually previously worked with Ivan Reitman on the 1988 film Twins before Ivan invited her back for this quick cameo. But yeah, after the show, Peter talks to his producer Norman about the quality of his guests and asks him why the telekinetic guy who bends spoons was not able to get on the show. This is a reference to the famous self-proclaimed psychic Uri Geller, who is famous for using illusions to bend metal spoons for amazed audiences. However, Peter is soon distracted by the arrival of Mayor Lenny, played once again by actor David Margiles. And of course, accompanying the mayor is his assistant, Jack Hardemeyer, played by actor Kurt Fuller. Jack's entire character is an obvious copy-paste of the character Walter Peck from the previous film. The production tried to get actor William Atherton to reprise his role as Walter Peck, but he ultimately declined to do so. Mostly because people on the street kept calling him Dickless because of the joke in the first movie.
Everything was fine with our system until the power grid was shut off by Dickless here.
They caused an explosion.
Is this true?
Yes, it's true. This man has no dick.
So because of that, the character of Jack Hardemeyer was born. After Jack tells Peter that the Ghostbusters are not welcome near the mayor, the movie switches on over to the Manhattan Museum of Art's Restoration Department, overseen by the creepy and predatory Dr. Janos Poha. Peter MacNicol wasn't initially a huge fan of the way his character was written in the script that he initially read, which had his character as just a regular art curator named Jason, and he nearly rejected the opportunity to be in the film but decided to do so anyway just to get some work. And after a while of messing with things, he decided to morph the character into one with strong ties to Europe, convincing Ivan Reitman to give the character a thick accent, one that was apparently inspired by a Czech friend of his, as well as actress Meryl Streep's outstanding performance in the tragic 1982 film Sophie's Choice, a movie that MacNicol also starred in himself. Ivan Reitman liked that idea so much that he decided to slightly alter the spelling of Jason's name to create Janos. And trailing behind Janos as he enters the scene is a massive painting of Vigo the Carpathian, set to be restored by talented artists like Dana Barrett for a big exhibit on romantic art. This painting used in the film is actually not even a painting at all, but actually a photograph of Vigo actor Wilhelm von Homburg stylized to look like a painting. And this painting is actually currently housed in the offices of Industrial Light and Magic, as they're the ones who helped bring it to life in the first place. A clock in the background reads 11:40 a.m. as Dana cleans up a painting by famous 19th century English romantic landscape painter Richard Parkes Bonington. Janos tries to put the moves on Dana but is rejected for the millionth time, much like Louis Tully was in the previous film. And also much like Louis Tully, Janos would end up being mind-controlled by the movie's main villain by movie's end. Then the movie brings us to Ray's Occult Books, whose exterior is actually located at 33 St. Mark's Place in New York City. Inside, Ray and Egon look through history to attempt to address Dana's problem before Peter Venkman suddenly walks in.
Perhaps you could help me. I'm looking for a love potion aerosol that I could spray on a certain penthouse pet to obtain her total submission.
This weird impression that Venkman does as he enters the store was actually a continuation of an earlier prank that was removed from the movie. Apparently, Peter prank called Ray earlier with that voice, asking for a copy of the Magical Paths to Fortune and Power book in order to seduce a penthouse model. But yeah, while in the shop, Peter manages to torture Ray to reveal that both he and Egon are helping out his ex Dana solve yet another one of these strange paranormal happenings in her life, leading him to tag along with them to her apartment. And when the three arrive, Egon and Ray immediately start preparing to examine little baby Oscar. Ray recommends that they attempt something called the Gamel and Pross Infant Acuity Test, a completely fictional test thrown into the movie as a shout out to comedy writing duo Tom Gamel and Max Pross. Best known for writing classic episodes of Seinfeld, while contributing as both producers and writers for shows like The Simpsons, Saturday Night Live, and It's Gary Shandling Show over several decades. And after Egon and Ray finish their test and scan Oscar with their psychokinetic energy or PKE meter, they then head into the baby's bedroom. And this is super random and not really important at all, but amongst Oscar's collection of stuffed animals and dinosaurs is a little purple dinosaur, which is kind of ironic considering how Barney the dinosaur would not begin taking over children's entertainment by storm until 3 years after this movie came out in 1992. So Oscar was a little bit ahead of the curve there. And when Dana goes to check on how Peter is doing with baby Oscar, he jokingly tells her that Oscar is ugly, but thankfully not Elephant Man ugly, a reference to the famous 1980 movie Elephant Man based on real-life Elephant Man Joseph Merrick, who got that name after he worked at a circus freak show that showcased his severely deformed face. The three men and Dana then head outside to examine where Oscar's stroller stopped moving. Peter Venkman then hilariously starts attempting to direct the busy New York traffic, which is something that actor Bill Murray would do often in real life whenever traffic got too chaotic, according to Dan Aykroyd. And while Ray scans the street with his PKE meter, Egon scans the street with his own Geiger meter, a new device introduced in this movie that uses giga electronic volts to measure psychomagnetheric energy. And to make this Geiger meter, the production used an electronic cordless power scrubber and buffer from Redmond Corporation for the base, before slapping on a pair of motorized moving condenser mics, some spinning lights, and a plastic dome-like covering. But yeah, this then leads the Ghostbusters to very illegally drill a hole into the sewers of New York City before lowering Ray into said hole. And this street corner that they're drilling at isn't actually in New York City at all, but actually located on East 8th Street and South Los Angeles Street in Los Angeles, California. But yeah, underground, Ray discovers a glowing river of purple goo that he attempts to extract a sample of. The Ghostbusters heading underground was always something that Ghostbusters creator Dan Aykroyd wanted to do for Ghostbusters 2. But heading to the sewers was not exactly what he initially had in mind. The first version of the Ghostbusters 2 script actually had the Ghostbusters travel 2,000 miles underground over the course of 3 days while on a quest to save Dana Barrett from having been kidnapped. But I'm not talking about the Ghostbusters traveling 2,000 miles under the streets of New York. Dan Aykroyd actually wanted Dana to be kidnapped and brought to the beautiful country of Scotland, where the Ghostbusters team would eventually find and do battle with a big bad banshee entity in the region. And even though the Ghostbusters never end up fighting a banshee in live action, they do end up doing so in the season 2 episode of The Real Ghostbusters titled Banshee Bake a Cherry Pie, as well as in season 1 episode 17 of the other Ghostbusters cartoon series Extreme Ghostbusters in an episode titled Sonic Youth. After securing a sample, Ray is almost attacked by this flowing goo before his colleagues pull him out of the hole, accidentally knocking the power out for the entire city in the process. And while all that was happening, over at the Museum of Art, Janosch is possessed by Vigo, who orders him to find a random baby to use as a vessel for his return. And speaking of Vigo, Vigo's character was inspired by two main historical figures, Vlad the Impaler as well as Grigory Rasputin. And even though the role of Vigo is played physically by actor Wilhelm von Homburg, all of the actor's lines were dubbed over in post by another actor named Max von Sydow. And what's worse is how nobody on the production would let Wilhelm know until the very night of the big Ghostbusters 2 premiere. And when Bro found out, he was so pissed that he stormed out of that premiere. And honestly, that is a valid crash out if I ever did see one, because I would be pissed off as well. Like, what the hell, man? I mean, yeah, the first movie did do the same thing with the actor that played Gozer in Ghostbusters 1, but the least that they could have done was give Wilhelm a heads up beforehand. Kind of messed up how they surprised him like that. But anyways, after receiving his marching orders, Janosch brings his creepy ass to Dana's door during the citywide blackout, trying to get her to let him in so that they could bone before he steals her baby. But Dana promptly rejects him. Because why wouldn't you? He looks like that. We are then brought to the Thurgood Marshall U.S. Courthouse, where Peter, Ray, and Egon stand trial for their felonious actions with a jackhammer in front of Judge Stephen Wexler, played by the late Harris Yulin, who recently passed away on June 10th, 2025. For some reason, they decided to hire Louis Tully as their lawyer, with actor Rick Moranis returning in the role from the first film. The prosecuting attorney is played by actress Janet Margolin in her final film role before her passing on December 17th, 1993. And the courtroom set that they use for this scene is actually a redressed version of a courtroom found in the 1986 comedic legal thriller Legal Eagles, also directed by Ivan Reitman. And what's odd is that even though Winston can be seen in the audience during this trial, as the trial goes on, Winston seemingly disappears altogether. Not even in the crowd when Judge Wexler gives out his guilty verdict in a super emotionally unhinged fashion. The judge's emotional response then causes a container of nearby mood slime to explode, revealing the ghost figures of two previously executed criminals, Nunzio and Tony Scolari, known collectively as the Scolari brothers, ready to haunt the people responsible for their deaths, which are apparently Judge Wexler and the prosecutor. The Scolari brothers were actually heavily based on the Blues Brothers, one of Dan Aykroyd's most beloved roles, alongside his late buddy John Belushi. This being said, this is technically the second time a ghost has been made on a performance from John Belushi, as the iconic Slimer himself was also based on Belushi, specifically his performance as Bluto in National Lampoon's Animal House film. The Scolari brothers were also heavily based on a group of real-life thieves known as the Scolari brothers. Apparently, Harold Ramis's father, Nate Ramis, had a store that was once robbed by a duo known as the Scolari brothers, so he decided to use that name for this film. But yeah, seeing that ghosts are indeed real, the judge immediately dismisses the Ghostbusters trial so that they can take care of containing the ghosts. And after they do, the Ghostbusters immediately announce their grand return to ghostbusting, which is then accompanied by a montage set to Run DMC's Ghostbusters theme. At the start of this montage, we can see the return of actress Annie Potts as Ghostbusters secretary Janine Melnitz. Janine looks a lot different than she does in the first movie, mostly to match the look of the cartoon version of her character in the real Ghostbusters cartoon. A little bit later on in the montage, we see Ray and Peter stop the ghost of a jogger from terrorizing a jogging path before he's immediately surprised by one of the Ghostbusters traps. Jim Fye, the actor who plays this jogger ghost, also plays two other entities in this film: the skinny Scolari brother Tony Scolari, as well as the Statue of Liberty controlled by the Ghostbusters towards the end of the movie. And we can also see the Ghostbusters wearing new darker uniforms over the course of this montage as well. And even though the original plan was for the Ghostbusters to wear these new suits for the rest of the movie, director Ivan Reitman would change his mind last minute during shooting and decided for the Ghostbusters to go back to their original look, which is honestly for the best, because I do like that original look a lot better. And after we watch the Ghostbusters take turns sliding down the fire pole, we watch Ray run a red light in the Ghostbusters' new Ecto 1A vehicle as the Ghostbusters look over and Judge is driving. That moment was actually part of a much more sinister subplot involving Vigo and the Ghostbuster Ray. Because a little bit later on in the movie, when Ray is examining the painting of Vigo at the Museum of Art, he seems to get briefly entranced in his eyes before one of the Ghostbusters snaps him out of that trance. This moment was actually originally supposed to lead to Ray being possessed and manipulated by Vigo, much like Janosch was. And there was actually going to be a whole scene where this evil possessed Ray drives like a maniac in this Ecto 1A vehicle, threatening to eliminate everyone in sight, with Winston eventually ending Ray's rampage with a swift punch to the face. However, that scene would end up being deleted from the movie, with only a small bit being preserved for this montage. The montage continues with Louis walking through Ghostbusters HQ during lunchtime when he runs into the ghost Slimer, this time with a slightly different design and personality than he did when he first appeared in the original movie. The Slimer in this film is a lot more friendly in nature, with that influence of course being due to the popularity of the real Ghostbusters cartoon series that debuted 3 years before this one. In that series, Slimer was of course a friendly ghost that hung around Ghostbusters HQ with the boys, so they just brought over that concept for this movie because the kids were already familiar with it. The real Ghostbusters cartoon actually had a massive influence on the overall tone of this Ghostbusters sequel. I mean, the original film was written to be a lot more raunchier and adult, mostly because it wasn't purposely aimed at a child audience. But since the kids responded so well to the original film and the cartoon series, they made sure to tone down the adult jokes, smoking, and overall scariness of the ghost this time around. But anyways, this moment of Louis interacting with Slimer was originally supposed to kick off a subplot of Louis attempting to capture Slimer in order to prove himself enough to become the 5th member of the team, with their cat and mouse chase ending with a truce when Slimer picks Louis up in the bus at the end of the film. But they ended up tossing those scenes out of the final cut. But luckily, after the release of this movie, Louis Tully would be added to the Ghostbusters team in the real Ghostbusters cartoon series continuity. But anyways, after the montage, the guys begin testing the mood slime by yelling at it, causing it to bubble up. And in the background of that scene, you can see that the Ghostbusters own an arcade machine for the popular game Jump Bug, a game where you jump around various environments, taking down enemies in a Volkswagen Beetle. Seeing how much time Ray and Egon have been spending with this mood slime, Peter jokingly asks if Ray has been sleeping with the slime. A bit of a callback to the scene from the first movie where Ray released his own ectoplasm when a ghost unzipped his pants in bed. Egon then grabs a Toastmaster B700, pours some mood slime into it, and starts playing Higher and Higher by Jackie Wilson on the radio in order to make the toaster dance. After this, we see Peter Venkman make a visit to the Museum of Modern Art, whose exterior shots are actually of the Alexander Hamilton U.S. Custom House at 1 Bowling Green, New York City. Inside the museum, Dana is working on restoring a painting from famous French artist Paul Gauguin when Peter swings by. She then tells Peter how the painting of Vigo makes her feel uncomfortable, which then leads him to tell the homies about it. A little bit later, Egon does a little bit of digging on his Hewlett-Packard computer and discovers that Vigo the Carpathian's full name is actually Vigo von Homburg-Dutzendorf. This name is actually created as a combination of the real names of 3 of the movie's actors. The von Homburg part of Vigo's name is of course from Vigo actor Wilhelm von Homburg, while the Dutzendorf last name actually originates from the last names of both Henry J. and William T. Dutzendorf, the twin babies that play little baby Oscar. But speaking of Oscar, that night when Dana tries to give Oscar's little dirty poo-poo butt a bath, she and Oscar are nearly attacked by her mood slime affected bathtub. And when Dana lets out a blood-curdling scream, I love how Sigourney Weaver makes sure to cover the ear of the baby so that they didn't get startled. Ivan Reitman has gone on record to say that this bathtub scene feels very reminiscent of the bathtub scene from a movie that he produced in 1975 called Shivers. The production actually had a few ideas for what this bathtub monster would look like, ranging from a monster made out of soap bubble eyeballs to a giant tub monster heavily inspired by the Audrey 2 plant monster from Little Shop of Horrors. Dana and Oscar then immediately book it out of her apartment and head straight to Peter's place at 644 Broadway and Bleecker Street to stay with him for safety. Peter then decides to wrap the baby in a green sports jersey that he claims used to belong to Joe Willie Namath, former quarterback for the New York Jets. The next day, the Ghostbusters immediately head to the Museum of Art for clues and to take pictures of Vigo. Then Peter heads back to his newly cleaned apartment to check on Dana and Oscar, where we can see a few media images that were featured during a montage in the first movie hanging on his wall. A New York Post article with the headline, Ghost Cops Bust Chinatown Spook, a USA Today article with the headline, Ghost Fever Grips New York, along with a Time magazine cover with the words, Ghostbusters Supernatural Success Story. And while talking to baby Oscar, Peter jokingly tells Oscar that he has some Laura Antonelli tapes around if he ever gets bored, while the two of them go on their romantic date together, with Laura Antonelli being a famous Italian erotic film actress known for films like Secret Fantasy, Malicious, and Lovers and Other Relatives. Meanwhile, Egon and Ray scan their photos of Vigo with their spectral analyzer within the Ghostbusters dark room. But things get a little bit too dark in the dark room as soon as Egon and Ray discover Vigo's true form inside of the painting, a floating head in front of a river of mood slime. And in order to make that effect of Vigo's head floating above a river of mood slime, the geniuses at Industrial Light and Magic actually built a miniature set of columns and then poured slime down those columns before throwing Vigo's blue-screened head over that effect. And for every take, they would literally have to clean up that miniature and re-pour the slime on it so the slime appeared endless in the background. But yeah, Vigo would then lock Ray and Egon within that dark room before setting all the photos they took on fire. And if it wasn't for Winston's quick thinking, Egon and Ray would be gone and flambéed. This scene was actually filmed during the reshoot phase of production because Ivan Reitman felt like the movie needed a little bit more action and suspense after one of the early cuts of the movie made it seem like Peter and Dana's romance took center stage to everything else. And since Ray recognized the river of slime from his time underground, Egon, Ray, and Winston then head down to the sewers to check things out. Suddenly, a disembodied voice says Winston's name before surrounding the Ghostbusters with a bunch of severed heads on spikes. Very likely the ghosts of people that Vigo tortured and killed when he was alive. And while it's unclear which head specifically it is known that one of these heads was actually designed by Tool lead guitarist Adam Jones. And what's wild is Ivan Reitman originally planned for a giant animatronic frog ghost to also scare and attack the Ghostbusters during this subway sequence, but Reitman ultimately cut that massive creature out. But after their brush with madness, Egon recommends that they all grab their proton packs just in case, with that line actually being the first time in live-action Ghostbusters history that the term proton packs has been used. However, before they could actually go get said proton packs, a tunnel decides to run a train on poor unsuspecting Winston Zedmore, who is immediately traumatized by said experience. Not sure why I worded it like that, but whatever. Egon then notes that ghost train originally derailed in 1920, though such an event never actually happened in real life, especially since New York City straight up banned the use of steam trains about 12 years prior to that in 1908. But anyways, the three Ghostbusters eventually find their way to the river of slime that Ray found earlier, before Winston actually falls into that river. After Ray and Egon jump in after him, they immediately make their way back up to the surface, almost killing one another in the process thanks to being covered in the mood-altering goo. And after the Ghostbusters head to the restaurant where Peter is having his date with Dana to pick him up, the four of them then head to the mayor's residence at Gracie Mansion as On Our Own by Bobby Brown plays in the background. And speaking of Bobby Brown, we do get a cameo from the music artist himself as a doorman who greets the Ghostbusters on their way to their mayoral meeting.
Oh, Ghostbusters!
How you doing?
Hey, guys, come right this way.
And one of my favorite bits during their conversation with the mayor happens when Ray tells the mayor that almost 50% of the group voted for him during the election. Because since he said almost 50% and there's 4 of them, that means that only Ray voted for Mayor Lenny because he would make 25%. The group then tries to convince the mayor that all the negative emotions of New Yorkers were manifesting as this explosive slime, but the mayor dismisses them as whack jobs. And while the Ghostbusters consider going to the New York Times or the New York Post with their story, the mayor's assistant Jack Hardemeyer tricks them into telling their story to the professionals at the Parkview Psychiatric Hospital. And the main psychiatrist in charge is actually played by Brian Doyle Murray, the brother of actor Bill Murray. And you can really tell that those two are related because they look so much alike. But yeah, as the Ghostbusters get used to their straitjackets, Janosz communicates with Vigo and asks him if he could take Dana as his wife when Vigo takes over the entire planet. And as Janosz is talking with Vigo during this scene, I notice that he's sitting directly in the middle of a star instead of a red circle, very much in the style of the conjuring circles that witches and sorcerers use in fiction to summon beings from beyond. And I also feel like this floor design doubles as an omen for the end of the world as well, as it appears to be reflective of a red star, which usually symbolizes the end of days. Brilliant cinematography there. Meanwhile, over at the apartment, Dana, along with babysitters Louis and Janine, watched the 1947 noir film The Lady from Shanghai, starring Rita Hayworth and Orson Welles, with Louis referring to Orson Welles as Citizen Kane due to Orson also having starred in that classic film. But while the three of them are distracted with the movie, Oscar in the Winnie the Pooh onesie decides to walk off the side of Dana's apartment building to wait for an Uber ride from Scary Poppins. And apparently when you work for Vigo, he also gives you Danny Phantom-ass ghost powers, as long as you dress up as an ugly old woman. This scene of Oscar's kidnapping actually could have gone a lot differently if the production used any of their earlier ideas. Other potential baby kidnapping ghosts that were considered were gargoyles, a ghost taxi cab, a scary Santa Claus, a ghost with the face of the moon, a massive ghost pigeon, or a squad of hellspawn. And even though this seems like a random choice of baby clothes, I really appreciate how the movie puts little baby Oscar in a Winnie the Pooh onesie, because in my opinion, it really underscores the whole idea of negative emotions attempting to corrupt the goodness of everybody in New York. Because Winnie the Pooh is a character known for his innocence, goodness, and purity, much like babies are, and Vigo wants to corrupt that pure vessel with his evil soul, much like how negativity wishes to corrupt the inner goodness of humanity. But yeah, Dana heads straight to the museum to get her baby back, but she is pretty much immediately captured before we get a montage of mood slime chaos set to Glenn Frey's Flip City. And at the start of this montage, we see a crowd of movie patrons fleeing a New Year's Eve showing of the 1973 film Cannibal Girls, starring Andrea Martin and Eugene Levy, one of the first films that Ivan Reitman ever directed in his career. And speaking of actor Eugene Levy, he was actually supposed to be in this movie as Sherman Tully, the cousin of Louis Tully, who also happened to be the director of the psychiatric institution that Jack sends the Ghostbusters to. But all of his scenes were deleted. And also, speaking of past Ivan Reitman films, as the patrons are running from the movie theater, you can see a black poster for his 1975 film Shivers on the wall. After this, we see the fur coat of a woman come to life before that fur coat runs away from her. This moment was actually apparently originally supposed to happen in the first Ghostbusters film during a fashion show, but Ivan Reitman decided to cut that out. Then, after we see a ghost emerge from the Washington Square Arch at Washington Square Park, we witness the return of the Titanic, which of course sank in 1912 after striking an iceberg, killing Leonardo DiCaprio in ice cold blood. The production was actually heavily considering using the Hindenburg instead, an airship that infamously crashed on May 6, 1937, but they decided to go with the Titanic instead. And watching the ghost disembark from the Titanic is none other than Cheech Marine of Cheech and Chong fame in a quick little cameo.
Well, better late than never.
And speaking of cameos, in the following scene in the mayor's office, we see actor Ben Stein amongst the city officials attempting to address the massively growing ghost problem, with Mayor Laney hilariously describing New York as the 10th level of hell. This is of course a reference to Dante's Inferno, which canonically has 9 levels of hell instead of 10. And after having been visited by the ghost of former New York Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, Mayor Laney tells his staff to call the Ghostbusters before firing Jack Hardemeyer for having them committed. And speaking of Jack, there was actually a deleted scene where he was punished a lot more harshly. Apparently, when the Ghostbusters arrive at the slime-covered museum, Jack attempts to solve the issue himself, only to be consumed by all of the mood slime covering the building, leaving nothing behind but his shoes.
All right, I'll do it myself. Jack Hardemeyer of the mayor's office is coming through. Now get out of my world!
But anyways, when the Ghostbusters arrive to the museum covered in goo, Winston remarks that he hates Jell-O, to which Peter replies with Jell-O's classic slogan, "There's always room for Jell-O."
Oh, come on, there's always room for Jell-O.
There's always room for Jell-O.
They then attempt to blast the slime-covered museum with all their proton packs to no avail, as the negative emotions of New York made this goo extra adorable. So, in order to fill the streets of New York with positive emotions, the Ghostbusters decide to head to the Statue of Liberty on Liberty Island to attempt to bring it to life using nothing but positive slime, an Advantage joystick for the original Nintendo Entertainment System, and the sounds of Higher and Higher by Jackie Wilson. The slime throwers that the Ghostbusters use were actually heavily inspired by flamethrowers that they use in the military. And in a deleted scene, Ray would actually refer to these slime throwers as the Slime-A-Zooka BB900, which is kind of funny. And even though these slime throwers were 4 times bigger than the actual proton packs, there wasn't any actual slime on the inside of those packs. The slime was actually stored in a separate canister held by the crew off screen that used air pressure to shoot out the slime. But yeah, after they shoot all of their happy goo all over Lady Liberty and start playing music, the statue indeed comes to life, because the laws of science are very strong in this universe, apparently. And rather than freaking out at the giant green woman taking a stroll down the street, the people of New York actually cheer in excitement, which is insane. Like, if I saw that shit, I would have called 911 so fast, like, bitch, call the Power Rangers, send the Megazord, we need some help! But yeah, the Ghostbusters then ride Lady Liberty all the way to the museum before confronting Janosch and Vigo. And during their battle, Vigo briefly takes control of Ray, another leftover element from the deleted Ray possession plot thread. Apparently, this is when it would have been revealed that Vigo still had influence over Ray after taking over his mind earlier in the film. But here, it just appears that Vigo randomly chooses Ray as his vessel. But luckily, the Ghostbusters are still able to save Ray by blasting Vigo with their proton packs and slime throwers, sending him back to hell where he belongs. But anyways, that is it for this breakdown of Ghostbusters 2. What is your favorite scene of the film? Let us know in the comment section down below. But like always, you guys can follow me at Mastertainment on Twitch, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, wherever I am on the internet. But most importantly, follow Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube by hitting the subscribe button and maybe even hitting that like button if you guys enjoyed the video. But like always, I've been MT, you guys have been amazing, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.